Now, as I said, in this course, we'll build a single-page application with Angular. Now, what is that? What is a single-page application? Well, in an Angular app, we'll have one root HTML file, a so-called index HTML file. And we will serve that from our Node server or from a different server. That's important. It can be totally decoupled of our Node backend, and it actually will be. And this HTML page basically includes some script imports that houses our Angular app, so the Angular framework and our own code. And we use that application to dynamically re-render what the user sees without ever requesting a second page to be rendered by the server. Why? Because by having this pattern, we never need to reload the page just because the user maybe clicked on a post and want to see the details. We can instead navigate to that page directly because we don't really leave the page. We just remove some elements from the DOM and add new elements. And all of that is handled for us by the Angular framework. It's really convenient to use and to work with the DOM with it. And therefore, we have a powerful way of immediately changing the page, maybe showing a spinner whilst we're fetching some data behind the scenes. So that list of posts, which we probably still need to get, but we will do that behind the scenes. And this provides a highly interactive mobile app-like feeling, a very responsive and fast web page where we never have to wait, where things always happen. And that, of course, is a great user experience. And this is why we will use JavaScript and Angular, therefore, for the entire frontend, for the entire user interface. And we will use Node, Express, and MongoDB as a backend to which we reach out behind the scenes to fetch data and send data, but the whole user interface is handled as one page only, which is dynamically re-rendered all the time by Angular. So for this course, we will need a couple of tools, and we'll install and add them step by step. For example, MongoDB will be added a bit later. What we'll definitely need is Node.js. For one, because we will write and run Node.js code, our server-side logic, but also because even Angular needs it, even if we were not to create our own Node app, not because Angular uses Node.js language features, but because Angular actually is a framework that has a more complex build workflow. So the part where we take our source code as we write it as a developer and transform it into code that runs fine in the browser, that's a bit more complex with Angular because Angular, for one, uses TypeScript, a superset to JavaScript, so a different language that's heavily based on JavaScript, and that's important, that does not run in the browser. And to make it run, we need to compile it, and it will be done for us, no worries, but that task runner doing the compilation in the end is Node.js, for example. So this will run all throughout the development process. We won't need to write any code for that, but this is some stuff that happens behind the scenes. And not just the TypeScript to JavaScript compilation. The Angular code itself needs to be bundled and optimized, and we need to reduce the code size by stripping out unused code and minifying it. And all of these are tasks handled by Node.js on our machine whilst we are developing the application or when we are finishing it up, basically. And Node.js will be used for that too. So we need it for these two reasons. For the Node.js code we write for our backend and for the Angular build workflow. And to learn more about Angular and the Angular workflow and how it works, definitely check out a course dedicated to Angular, because whilst I will cover some Angular basics in this course, in general, I do expect you to know the very basics about Angular. This is not a course for you if you never touched Angular before. So with that out of the way, download Node.js from nodejs.org, and there pick the latest version, 10.1 in my case. If you're facing issues with that, fall back to the older version, but in general, it's recommended to use 10.1 or whatever the latest version is when you're viewing this. Simply click on that and it will download an installer through which you can walk. It's available for both macOS and Windows and also Linux, and it should automatically give you the right download there. And once you successfully installed it through the installer, we can think about setting up an Angular application, because that is actually what we'll start with in this course. For that, we'll use another tool, and that's the Angular CLI. CLI stands for command line interface, and it's the de facto way of creating Angular apps. Because of that more complex build workflow I mentioned, we need a lot of tools that compile our code, optimize it, and setting all of that up on our own is pretty cumbersome and error prone. The CLI gives us a project setup where all of that is taken care of and where we can focus on writing our Angular code, our logic. The CLI is installed like this, and it uses npm, the Node Package Manager, to install the CLI tool globally on our machine with this first command here. npm, the Node Package Manager, is installed together with Node.js automatically, so if you installed Node.js, you will have npm. Now let's therefore now install the CLI. I already got Node.js installed, so I can just fast forward to this step. And to install the CLI, you should open your terminal or command prompt on your machine, and then run npm, this Node Package Manager command, which is available with Node.js, install -g for globally, because we want to install that Angular CLI globally on our machine so that we can use it from anywhere on our machine. And then the name of that CLI package is @Angular/CLI. And make sure to not mistype this, the naming is important. You can add a @latest to absolutely fetch the latest version, but it should by default give you that version. Now on Windows, this command should be fine like this. On Mac and Linux, you might need to add a sudo in front of this to get the right permissions to execute this command. Hit enter thereafter, and enter your password if you are prompted for it. And thereafter, it will download that CLI package from npm's repository and install it on your machine. This can take a couple of seconds up to minutes, and I'll be back once it's done. So it's done installing, and in my case, I got some errors in between, but that's no problem as long as it finishes with some output where it mentions the package name and version and says updated or added 8, or the number can actually differ, packages. So if you see something like that, it succeeded. You may ignore any errors that happened in between. It was able to recover from these. Now, once this is installed, we can create a new Angular project with the CLI. And we'll add Node and Mongo and Express to that project setup throughout the course. But let's start with the frontend, because that is how we can quickly see something on the screen. So let's create a new project, and for that navigate into the folder where you want to create the project. Once you're in that folder, and you can get there with the cd command on your machine, create a new project with ng-new. That is a command now available due to that CLI package. ng is basically a command made available by that. And then the name of the project. And I will name it mean course, but of course you can pick any name you want. Just make sure it's not starting with a number and it's not named test. That is forbidden. But anything else is fine. Mean course should work. And once you hit enter, it will set up that project. It will create a lot of files in there. Most of them are configuration files for that workflow. We don't need to worry about them. And it will also give us a little dummy app with which we can start. It will also install all the dependencies like the Angular Framework and other dependencies that framework depends on, but also a couple of build or workflow dependencies. So dependencies that compile the TypeScript code, dependencies that optimize the code, things like that. So this can take a while, and I'll be back once it's done. Now, once it is done, you can navigate into that newly created folder with cd and then the name of that folder. And in there, simply run ng-serve to bring up a development-only server. And this is not a server you will use to deploy it. I will show you how to deploy that app towards the end of the course. This is a development-only server that allows you to preview your application. Double-clicking on the index.html file won't work because that will use the file protocol and not the HTTP protocol, and therefore many features we need are not enabled. And this gives us a real web server running on our machine at this address you see here, HTTP localhost 4200 by default. And you can then go to a browser and simply visit localhost 4200. And on that URL, you should see something like this, some dummy starting page the CLI gives you by default. Now with that set up, we of course want to work on our code. And for that, we need some IDE or some advanced text editor that makes that easier. Now you can use any IDE you want, like Sublime, Atom, WebStorm. In this course, I will use Visual Studio Code. Now let's set it up and open our project in the next lecture. Welcome on this course page. Great to see you're interested in this course. In this course, we'll dive deeply into the mean stack. That means into MongoDB, ExpressJS, Angular, and NodeJS. We'll build a beautiful Angular frontend and we'll attach an awesome NodeExpress backend with MongoDB as a database. We'll therefore build a full stack application which has all the features you would expect of such an application. Things like authentication, authorization, image upload, pagination, so much more, you name it. It's all in here. I really did my best to put all these cool features into this course and go through them together with you. By the end of the course, you'll truly be a mean master and you'll be able to dive much deeper into all these concepts and build your next mean project with the knowledge gathered in that course. Now, who am I? My name is Max. I'm Maximilian Schwarzmüller. I'm a freelance web developer and professional Udemy instructor. I got multiple 5-star rated courses here on Udemy, like my Angular The Complete Guide course, and I've worked with all these technologies for a very long time. I did my best to put all that knowledge into this course and pass it on to you, and I'd be super excited to welcome you on board of this course and go through all these topics with you. So let's quickly start working on the Angular app we created. This is the folder the CLI gave us, and as you can see, it has a bunch of subfolders and files. As I said, most of these files are purely for configuration and we don't need to worry about them. The package.json file is interesting because here you can see all the dependencies and development-only dependencies of the project, and later once we start adding some MongoDB-related dependencies, we'll also see them here. We got files for configuring the TypeScript compilation, and you don't need to worry about that. The defaults are fine. We got the Angular JSON file, which is for the Angular CLI, and we also don't need to worry about this file in the course for now. Then E2E is for end-to-end testing. We won't cover this here. Node modules actually stores all these dependencies which are listed here, so they are installed into that folder so that they are available to the project. And you can always recreate that folder by running npm install inside this project folder in the terminal. This will read the package.json file and download and install them all into a newly created Node modules folder. And the source folder is where our Angular application lives in. Here we got even more config files which we can safely ignore. And then we got this app folder here. Now there we write the meat of our Angular application. Angular actually uses components. I'll come back to that in the next section. And we create our whole application by composing our UI from such components.